Welcome back to It's a Numbers Game. I'm Adam Morris and my co-host is Daniel Welling. Now, if you've been listening for a while, you'll know we talk a lot about how MSPs can grow their revenue and differentiate themselves from the competition. And today's conversation might just be one of the most practical and genuinely exciting examples of that we've had on the show. We're talking about compliance as a service, and specifically the very real opportunities for MSPs to turn something their clients are already being asked for into a recurring high-margin revenue stream. Joining us today are two guests who, between them, are making that a lot more achievable. Dom Haughton is Senior Product Specialist at Brigantia Partners, one of the UK's most respected distributor communities for MSPs. And Alastair Goodwin is founder and CEO from Adoptech, an intelligent compliance platform that's helping businesses achieve certifications like Cyber Essentials and ISO 27001. Whether you've been quietly wondering whether compliance belongs in your service catalogue, or you've already dipped your toe in and want to go further, this conversation is going to give you a clear picture of what the opportunity looks like and how to grab it.
Al and Dom, welcome to the program.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Yeah, afternoon. Good afternoon. And just a week ago, we were at the National Liberal Club on a panel together talking about the compliance opportunity for MSPs. And it couldn't have been really timed any better, the fact that we got this podcast scheduled in for the next week, because it's a topic fresh in our minds and well explored. And it's one that I have a particular interest in, because I think this is definitely an untapped opportunity for MSPs, mainly because of referring back to my own experience of going through ISO, my original MSP business, and just what an uncompatible process it was with being an IT service provider. So perhaps we could kick off with how you normally approach an MSP with this topic. Are MSPs coming to you and saying, we want to certify ourselves, or are they coming to you saying we want to do it with our clients? What's normally the starting point?
So I guess from my point of view, we'll approach MSPs directly to offer them the opportunity to deliver compliance as a service. A lot of the Brigantia MSPs are not the largest in the UK. They're kind of a smaller bunch, really tight community. So bringing those on board and allowing them to offer compliance as a service as a differentiator helps them fight with those bigger MSPs who have built-in compliance teams and everything like that. We're also seeing growth from their end customers to offer compliance as a service as well. They want to go to their IT provider because they see something like 27001 as a IT certification, even though it's business-wide. Mm-hmm. And this allows them to deliver that without, again, having that full compliance team on site.
Yeah. And it's what we typically see with the MSPs is that they'll start by, if they haven't already got Cyber Essentials, ISO 27001, and those type of certifications already, they'll then go through that process with us. By doing that, they'll have learned the process, they've understood it, they're better at reselling it, or setting up their own kind of compliance as a service function. But yeah, typically they'll come to us, and the first thing they'll do is actually go through the process themselves, effectively sort of eating your own dog food. So they understand how to sell it. When they get asked questions by customers about what does it really mean, do I really need it, they can talk with experience rather than just talking off a sales deck.
And Dom, just on this, how aware are you finding the MSP market at the moment around this particular solution, i.e. the as a service component? Is it kind of well known, or is it still emerging as a new product offering?
It's definitely still emerging. I think compliance as a whole for MSPs isn't a huge thing. A lot of them are going for Cyber Essentials Plus for that smaller scale MSP. A lot of the larger ones are already 27001 certified. They're already offering, managed security services. They haven't, maybe even the larger ones, tapped into the compliance as a service element yet. They're going to be the first ones to offer this by bringing on compliance teams themselves and maybe just buying a platform like Adoptech or, some of the larger ones, and then just kind of selling their own professional services wrapper. That's the end goal, I guess, for the smaller ones as well, right, is to deliver this to themselves. But yeah, having the opportunity to be able to deliver it as a service is a key differentiator for them. If they've got Cyber Essentials, they want to progress to 27001. The age-old myth is that it's going to be a 12 to 18-month battle. You get a consultant in, they're going to charge you 50 grand a year. It's going to be a huge outgoing for not a lot of gain, apart from that little badge that you get. And, that does help you differentiate, but it's not a huge, gain for that 50 grand a year that you spent. With a solution like Adoptech, it's guided. They'll do it themselves, or they can get someone like Adoptech in to actually help them deliver that internally. That then opens the doors for them to learn themselves how to deliver it and then deliver that onwards, or hand it off again, to Adoptech.
And, because this is the bit that was missing for me in my MSP, which is going back 5 years ago now. We had a cyber essentials service, and we made some margin on that, but we found it very difficult to productize, an annual process, especially around, the shape and size of it and trying to work out how big a project it was and how do we turn this into some kind of monthly recurring. So, for me, this is extremely exciting to, again, productize something, that can be quite complex and difficult to get your head around, and sort of streamline it and soften those edges, and indeed have a sort of template and support program behind it to help fill in some of those gaps. So yeah, a lot. I mean, I know we're early days in this podcast right now, but seriously, guys, for those who are listening right now, I think, you should be, if you're not doing this today, this is something you should certainly be looking at.
I think a lot of MSPs only have either Cyber Essentials or they don't even have Cyber Essentials. That needs to be, the real baseline for every MSP. Maybe C+, so you're not marking your own homework and just self-serving. If an MSP doesn't have C+, you're going to find over the next 2 or 3 years that they're just going to end up, going by the wayside. And a lot of MSPs who are, Cyber Essentials Plus is what, $1,500 a year, something like that, to buy the certificate and get it audited. If an MSP can't really afford to do that, then I think, they're going to end up falling by the wayside, the ones who are willing to, invest in compliance.
The one point I'll make around sort of the adoption of compliance by the MSPs, I don't think it's definitely not a lack of demand from the end customers. We speak to MSPs all the time and they're being asked for it all the time. There is an absolute reluctance to start selling because it's compliance, and because MSPs associate that with sitting through pages and pages of documentation. And, your typical MSP, the skill set's going to be technologists. The last thing they want to be doing is reading pages and pages of documents. But with the automation, with a lot of that kind of governance overhead, for example, the documentation, running tests that can automatically be run, you can connect through integrations and run tests every day against all the different services that you and your clients are using. That brings it a lot more into the space of a technologist, because they're a lot more familiar with running those tests and checking those things. What they don't want to be doing is, having to manually sit and write documents. But that's the benefit of this automation in these kind of automated compliance platforms like Adoptech. You literally answer a few questions, it generates the documents for you. All of that workflow is streamlined, so you're not spending hours and hours doing things that you really don't enjoy.
One of the most common conversations I have with MSP owners goes like this. We're busy, clients are happy, but the numbers never quite look how I think they should. And almost every time it comes back to the same thing. Not effort, not demand, but how the business is being valued and priced. And if I'm honest, it often runs a bit deeper than that. A lot of owners quietly undervalue what they do. They don't fully recognize the weight of responsibility, the experience they've built, or the impact they have on their clients' businesses. So pricing ends up lower than it should be. Not by a design, but by a belief. It's incredibly common. We see it all the time. And it's something we help MSP owners work through in a structured, practical way, so the numbers start to reflect the true value of what they deliver. If any of this resonates, it's worth having a conversation. So just head over to mspfinanceteam.com and book a slot in my diary, or email me at adam@mspfinanceteam.com.
Even then, though, and I guess just to be clear, there's sort of two options here. You can either have the platform and provide the professional managed service on top if you've got it within your team, or you can buy a done for you delivered service. And it's the latter which I feel the majority of MSPs would be most interested in, because they're, as much as they're probably not qualified themselves to be certification consultants, they're certainly not qualified to be able to source and manage certification consultants to deliver the service, and they've got enough headaches trying to find enough technical resource, and so the fact that it's a single cost of sale that can be acquired really gives you a nice clear margin gap as well. And that's the thing that I'm really interested. Almost I see it as it's another lease line, but hopefully a bit more sticky. Yeah, really easy margin to be able to bolt on, and I suspect more and more end users will crave the certification as much as the MSPs.
And I actually also like the principle of partnering with an expert. So, effectively the narrative with the end client is, look, we're very good with security, we're very good with devices, we're very good with workflow, and we can do compliance. But do you know what? We can't be experts in everything. So that is why we are partnering with a compliance expert. We have their experts on hand, plus we have this framework around it, which helps us deliver it. If you've got another small MSP coming and talking to you about how they're experts in everything, well, they're not. Right. So I think this all sort of comes together as a very tight and, well put together offering, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like any successful business, you stick to what you're good at. So, we're not going to start trying to become an MSP. In the same way, I wouldn't expect an MSP to become an expert in DORA regulation and understand how, MiFID II is going to work and various other sort of regs. The one point I'd also make, you talked about the sort of margins with Cyber Essentials, and I know they're pretty low rates. You typically can't charge a huge amount on top of that. But with some of these other certifications, we see MSPs making really good margin, much harder than these would on CEC Plus. So if they're doing sort of some of the other frameworks like ISO 27001, which is the information security one, like ISO 42001, which is becoming really, a lot more. It's a big uptake on that at the moment because it's the AI focused risk management framework. So we're getting a big uptake on that, but the margins on those are much higher than you might see with, reselling Cyber Essentials and things like that.
Just to add to that, if you think of your end customers as MSPs, if they need 27001, 9001, one of these compliance frameworks, typically they'll come to you first because you're the IT provider. If you can't provide it, they're going to go to a consultant anyway. So you, at the end of the day, would still need to be implementing the technical side of things anyway as their MSP. But they're going to be handing off that compliance piece to an actual consultant who'll help with the policies. So this is the opportunity for MSPs to actually take that margin from the consultant and, add extra margin on how they're delivering the full service. They're delivering the kind of compliance piece via someone like Adoptech, but then they're also delivering, the IT side of things. So they can wrap maybe a professional services wrapper around the actual compliance piece as well and say, we'll hand off to Adoptech to do the compliance project management. We'll use their platform. We'll do the technical side. It'll take X amount of days. This is your kind of day rate. And then each year, you've got that MRR from the actual product, the margins, and then you've got maybe an annual professional services wraparound. Any little remediations, maybe any larger scale context changes in the organization, you'll need to redo a point of audit. But yeah, for the most part, the compliance piece is done by Adoptech and you're just doing the technical side, but you're also getting extra margins from that, handing off to Adoptech.
Two questions. One, the magic number. What sort of margin range would we expect on this? And the second question is to understand a little bit about how in practice it would work. So we've started the compliance journey. Let's say we want to do the 27001. Will there be a nice, elegant partnership between Adoptech and the MSP in terms of these are the technical shortcomings that need to be addressed, and so then the MSP can go to the client and effectively propose a change project based on that requirements list?
Yeah, absolutely. And what we quite often find, and this is also is another opportunity for the MSPs, by going through the compliance exercise, we quite often find there are gaps, whether it's additional sort of cybersecurity controls or technologies that the firm needs to put in place that quite often they might have been putting off for quite some time. But when they actually start going through the compliance exercise and they've got, an end goal of achieving whatever certification it might be, that actually then encourages the client actually to put their hand in the pocket and pay for these additional tools that, MSP might have been sort of encouraging them to use for quite some time. But this is the driver, achieving this particular certification that will drive them to actually pay for some of these additional tools, whether it's, phishing simulations and those type of things, whatever it might be. So yes, in answer to this question, yep, you go through, there's an initial gap analysis, to, particularly from a tech perspective versus what's expected for the particular company and the information they're holding. And out of that, we'd be having discussions with the MSP about, what can you suggest? We need to get this customer up to this level in order for them to achieve the certification.
And the margin question.
I'm going to hand over to Dom for this one because, we see it very well.
The one point I'll make on the margin thing is,
Remember, the margin is on a bigger number compared to Cyber Essentials. So there is a reality that, carrying out something like 27,001 is a more expensive exercise than something like Cyber Essentials. It's not as large as you might think it's going to be, particularly in terms of implementation. The actual external audit is typically going to be around 2 to 3 times the cost of Cyber Essentials. Clearly, it depends largely on the size of the company and the complexity of the technology. But yeah, it's a bigger number, that margin. Dom, what are you seeing at the moment? You're obviously speaking to the MSPs.
Yeah, I think a lot of our partners are kind of adding on between 25 and 30% to that kind of monthly cost. So margins are really good in it. Typically, the difficulty in selling this, if they're just kind of going out to market to sell it, is a lot of the products that they'll be selling are kind of per user cost, £1.50 a user, £2.50 a user. To then say to a company, look, this is going to cost £500-600 a month, the end goal is great, right? That company gets 27,001. But that kind of large jump in number is where we see the difficulty in those smaller MSPs offering it, because a lot of their client base might be a kind of really small SME company, but they're saying, we need 27,001. What's it going to cost? They're used to hearing numbers like it'll be £200-300 a month for X amount of seats of an EDR product or something like that. You then say, no, it's going to be £500-600 a month, just as a random number out of the air. But that's kind of where the kind of pain points come from their point of view, offering it to those smaller clients. Any of the larger clients, they'll compare, this type of thing to using a consultant, and some of them are shocked. I heard one the other day, which was something like a 36 user company that'd been quoted, I think, 23,000 a year upfront from an external consultant, plus £1,000 a month retainer. And that was to deliver 27,001 year one. So on top of that, you've got external audit fees. So comparing that to a product like Adoptech is completely night and day. It's a third of the price. You're still getting that kind of consultative approach. You're not just kind of getting left to do it, on your own devices. And reality is, with something like Adoptech, you can deliver 27,001 in kind of 8 to 12 weeks rather than that 12 to 18 months, which is kind of the typical thing. So it's a lot quicker. It's a lot lower cost. It's a lot more personal of an approach. It's just, I don't see why a company wouldn't, look to this rather than something like a consultant. I think the consultative approach of using an external consultant who comes in once a year, sees you through that audit process and then leaves is, it's a bit outdated, I think.
This is really interesting, actually, because this touches on, the whole subject area around perception of value and what your MSP is. And It's something I bleat on about all the time with my mentoring customers, because it's all about mindset shift. And in particular, it's seeing yourself as being a business advisor instead of an engineer with a screwdriver, right? So once you see yourself as a consultant and actually, what would you pay your solicitors or your lawyers to get a project done? It's going to be 10, 15 grand, right? They're not going to get out of bed for less than £1,000 a day, £2,000 a day. Again, same with your finance advisors, etc. So it's got to be kind of positioned in that bracket, hasn't it? Not as actually you're rolling out a couple of laptops,
It's not break fix. It's very much, you are getting someone, maybe an MSP who is that consultant, but you're getting someone who's consulting your end customer on a really high level thing. Compliance isn't just I can go down the shop, buy a quick book from Tesco about compliance and then deliver it. It's not learning to fix a computer, fit a new hard drive.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think, again, I think probably for this to work with those lower MSP, those lower maturity MSPs, I think, this is an example of how they need to adjust their thinking and reposition their value overall. It's a really good example of doing that, actually. So I sense there will be absolutely that pushback with some MSPs and their end users, but it is all about that positioning. And if they can just start to work on that, and of course, that's the higher ticket price, right? That's the 27,001. That's not the Cyber Essentials stuff. Mm-hmm. That's coming in at a lower level, right? So, again, starting to package that, piece it together, maybe include it in their gold product, that kind of stuff. Have ISOs 27001 and all these offerings there on the shelf if they want them. When the need arises, we can turn that key and start that project quickly for you. I think there's a lot to be said for it.
What I've seen some of the more successful salespeople at the MSPs do actually is actually outline that in their sales decks that effectively they present to the end customers, where it's like, this is what it's going to cost you with a consultant. And by the way, we've got a consultant that you can call upon. This is what it's going to cost you with Adoptech. And they compare them directly in those decks. And those guys have been far more successful when you just put the numbers next to each other. The traditional way of doing it, 10 times the cost and effort and everything else on your side versus using an automated platform. So yeah, we've seen MSPs be really successful by doing that.
Are you seeing MSPs effectively displacing end clients that already have, say 27001? Are you seeing that as an opening opportunity that they're able then to provide a better priced solution for the incumbent 27001 end client, and as a route into then, and well, now we're doing that, now we can do services around IT as well?
Yeah, absolutely. But what it's interesting, there's a lot of relationships because it's typically been sold through a consultant. What we do find is that a lot of the MSPs have got consultants they've been using for their last X number of years, and they've got a really close relationship with them. And there's, a bit of, has quite rightly, there's a bit of trust there, and they want to honor that kind of relationship. But over time, it's just getting to a point where they're seeing that things are changing. We can't keep spending this amount. We can't keep, knowing that there's a much faster, more efficient solution here. We can't keep sort of peddling out offering that we've known for 5-10 years. So yeah, I think that, but equally, we're seeing some of those consultants change. So a lot of those consultants are starting to continue what they're doing, but start using platforms so they can service a lot more clients in a lot less time. So they'll have 10 clients as opposed to one client, but they're using tools. What I think the consultants that obviously are going to survive and do well are those ones that are willing to change and take that approach and start using the tools that are available.
And is this another, I guess it's another service the MSP can offer, and therefore they can produce marketing and sales outreach campaigns around ISO, for example, whereas before they'd have been talking about cybersecurity or about the regular MSP offerings, but now actually they can start targeting companies that are 27001, for example.
Yeah, as I kind of said earlier, the standard approach from an MSP, they probably started as some kind of break-fix type company, started then delivering maybe more security-sided products, maybe a managed security offering. Even a lot of those larger MSPs, some of them will have the 27001 or something as an offering that they do at the moment, but it's not part of their standard offering. It's very much, you can go to that MSP and say, oh, can you help us with 27001? And they'll say, okay, yeah, well, we know a consultant who can do that. They didn't hand it off. They probably get a cut of that day rate or something, but that's kind of one-off cost. Using a platform to manage that all year round makes it a much more sticky product, but it also keeps it in-house with them, so they have much better visibility over it. And yeah, I don't know if you want to add to that, Al.
Can I just ask the question, just for clarity for our audience as well? Which sectors are you seeing as higher targets for the compliance products? So either because an MSP might already have these, or maybe they're looking to move into those markets. So, finance, for example, obviously, but, in particular, which sectors are stronger targets?
So traditionally, it's been the regulated sectors, obviously finance, health, aviation. As you'd expect, they're regulated and those regulations get passed down. So you need to, because the end customers are demanding that those firms have these certifications in place. But what we've seen recently, particularly since, the Jaguar Land Rover type events last year, is that actually many different firms in supply chains that you wouldn't expect are now having to become certified at a higher level. So, for example, as you'd expect, automotive. So anyone in the kind of automotive, like you're seeing a lot more demand from anyone in that sector. We're also, I think probably, a good example might be, we have a company recently that are literally electricians and chippies. They go in and they fit out shops in the high street. They don't hold a lot of information. So in theory, you think there's not a huge amount of risk. They don't really need certifications like something. But because they happen to be, fitting out shops like banks, the banks have insisted to them that they now need to go and have 27001. So yeah, traditionally, And there still is a huge space in the market. I think traditionally it's like the regulated companies. More and more now we're starting to see demand from anyone in a particular supply chain, or you're starting to see professional services, so legal firms and accountancies. So a lot of the MSPs that are looking after like local legal firms and accountancies, they are increasingly having to move from sort of C sort of level to 27001 because it's expected by their customers. Dom, have you seen any other sort of particular sectors, areas recently?
I think, yeah, legal and financial are the two key ones. The MSP I worked at was quite a large MSP. One of my clients at the time was a large law firm. They were doing 27001 themselves, and we often tried to kind of take that from them and say, can we help with that? And all we could do at the time was deliver those technical controls. So we didn't have a product like this at the time, so it wasn't something we could really offer. But yeah, I think those type of firms, they're going to do it either way. So it's a case of, if you have a couple of solicitor customers or maybe accountancy firms, it's worth speaking to them all and trying to get an idea of, is that a go for them? Is that something they need to go for? Are they regulated and are they being asked for that? Is it going to reduce their cyber insurance premiums to have something like 27001? And would that benefit them to have it? There's a lot of different conversations that you can have as an MSP to these end clients to kind of open the doors for something like 27001. Those firms are the probably ones you'd want to start with, is kind of, regulated sectors, law firms, financial services, even I guess some manufacturing for the things like 9001 quality standard. Anyone who's delivering a service or a specific product where it needs to align to a certain quality, that 9001 quality standard is a good one as well. Maybe it's outside of that MSP remit traditionally, but it allows them to then offer that compliance as a service for something like that.
And you mentioned 9001. My original business, that's exactly what we went through for. At the time, I was doing it purely for getting the badge to help
service desk
differentiate me between the other MSPs in the area that didn't have that certification. So, but thinking practically as well, because this is now a monthly managed service rather than perhaps a chunky, difficult to swallow project. The sort of the startup, the younger business that wants to rapidly professionalize and mature, which are typically the high growth clients as well, adding new users every month. This would be a great service for that sort of business as well, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. We see, firms way before they've even started selling services coming to us and knowing that in order to sell those services, they're going to need these certifications. We have, literally one person, that companies that have gone through the 27001, but just a single person in the company as they started, because they know that they're just not going to be able to sell until they've got that. So it's a barrier to sale, so that they get it done right from the outset. And actually, it's like most of these things, the earlier you do it and you bed that whole culture and process into the company, the easier it is, because people just get used to, all the things you need to do that come with 27001, your monthly security training, your phishing simulator, all the things that you expected to do, you just get used to it. It's not then, oh, really? Have we really got to do this? So yeah, the earlier you can do it, the better.
We're probably at time, but just one question's crept into my head. And I guess I'd be thinking this if I was an MSP owner. Is there like some kind of scale here that if I don't get to, it's not worth doing? So, I rock up at an account meeting and they talk about needing to do some kind of compliance project. I'll think, oh, great, I can get into this tool set now. But actually, do I need like a pipeline? Do I need to be getting 4 or 5 of these guys on board before it's kind of worth it?
I think a company as a base level should always go for Cyber Essentials anyway. Some of the more regulated ones might have that goal of eventually doing 27001, or like the ones Al just mentioned, might upfront need to have that. I think getting that baseline in place for the end customers first, be it just Cyber Essentials, CE+, is probably the best thing, because then you've got all that technical controls in place. You've got the kind of baseline. If they then need to go down that supply chain management and risk management side of things, then they move on to something like 27001, which gives them that globally recognized standard. But I think as a very easy baseline, something like Cyber Essentials, from my point of view anyways, from what I see, is something that's required.
Yes.
Minimum, though, I think that was Adam's.
Well, so what I'm hearing is, take the low-hanging fruit of the Cyber Essentials. It's a given. You can sell a lot of it to your client base, right? And actually, if the odd one pops up and wants a higher level, you can do that. And if it's even if it's just a one-off, it's still scalable, it's still doable.
Yeah, because you just hand it over to us.
Yeah, okay.
It's literally it's a referral.
Yeah.
You don't have to. We've got MSPs that literally do not get involved at all. We've got other MSPs that actively get involved because maybe they want to sell it, but also they quite often they'll join our, if we have, let's say, quarterly security meetings, they'll quite often join because there's an upselling opportunity. So, right, we're focused on these risks. What controls are we going to put in place? And that's where the MSP will step in and go, here are 5 options of services we can offer you that are going to reduce the risk of you getting a phishing attack. So, yeah, it varies. You don't have to be involved at all, but there is that opportunity if you do stay involved in the process. But yeah, doesn't matter. It can be 1 to 100. It's not going to make any difference because you've got that option just to hand it over to us.
It's worth every MSP just adding it to their arsenal of tools, right? So you offer it, you do a marketing campaign a couple of times a year to say, we offer these services, compliance as a service. If one of those comes in, they're going to make a good bit of margin. As they talk to their friends, how well that process went, it then scales with that. So yeah.
No, super, and definitely something to add to every MSP's service catalog, basically, because it is frictionless and certainly a lot easier than it would have been in the past. So really interesting conversation. As Adam says, we're probably around about at time. So it's this time in the episode that we offer a shameless plug to our guests. I kind of feel like we've already done that throughout, though. But if anyone wants to carry on the conversation, how best to get in touch?
You can go first, Al, if you want.
Yeah, contact Brigantia, contact Dom.
Well, that was my plug anyway. So yeah, any small MSPs looking to improve any of the kind of security services they offer, any products, Brigantia.com is first point of call, I guess.
Very good. Thank you very much for joining us. Yeah, really interesting conversation, and I remain convinced a great opportunity for MSPs.